Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders to inspire us to think differently and lead better. In today's episode, we're uncovering the secret to making learning and development programs truly transformational. This is the second part of my conversation with Dr. Jim Kirkpatrick, who is a senior consultant for Kirkpatrick Partners and the visionary behind the new World Kirkpatrick Model. Jim is dedicated to helping learning professionals become strategic business partners and has co-authored several groundbreaking books in the space. In this episode, we're going to tackle the critical question, why do organizations invest heavily in learning and development programs without knowing if they truly make an impact? More importantly, how can organizations design development initiatives that drive real on-the-job performance, improve business results, and deliver tangible value? By the end of the episode, you'll have the tools and strategies to measure what matters and ensure your training programs deliver lasting results. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we engage with esteemed thought leaders and explore research-backed strategies and techniques that empower leaders at every level to achieve meaningful results that drive lasting change. Speak to me a little bit about the difference between usefulness and credibility, because you mentioned that information is useful to training professionals, and that typically relates to levels 1 and 2. You want to ensure the training results in learning, and ultimately participants are ready to perform that on the job. They can apply it. Information related to credibility relates to levels 3 and 4, because you need to convince the stakeholders that training participants used what they learned on the job, have performed better as a result, and positively affected those key business metrics that they were talking about when they first developed this training initiative.
Well, I haven't used those two terms together in a long time. I'm glad you brought it up. When you first did, I thought, no, wait a minute, yeah, that's right. I remember that. But you're right. So often something is useful, but leaders do not necessarily see that. It is incredible in their eyes. So the first thing you want to make sure is, here are the things that we agree on with a senior leader, right? This is what you said. Here's what we kind of added to it. These are going to be the signposts we look for that are credible to you. And of course, then we want to line it up. How useful is this for the outcome that you're looking for? And we want everybody to know that back to level 1, we want people in level 2, we want to make sure that what they're learning is relevant and therefore useful, because if it's not relevant, it's not useful, then it won't be credible. And so that's something that I have gotten into arguments with instructors that say, okay, it's their job, the student's job, to make sure that they stay engaged, and it's their job to make sure they find usefulness. And I say, yeah, it's half and half. It is their job to keep themselves in the moment and in the learning, take active participation and match what they're learning against what they're needing to do. Then it comes down to the instructors sometimes also say, well, it's not our job to help them find that usefulness, and to stay engaged and to find relevance. And it is. And I think good instructors keep people engaged halfway or more, and they help them find relevance by saying, now let's stop a minute here. How does this relate to what you do? And I love your little 20 minutes. You may go for some content and say, okay, hold the phone here a little bit. Let's take a look at now, how does this relate to what you think you're expected to do? And constantly toggling back and forth 1, 2, and 3.
Absolutely. And I love some of those foundational principles that you put as part of the model. And the reason why we started with 4, because the end is the beginning. Trainers must begin with the desired results, level 4, then determine the behavior, which is level 3, that is needed to accomplish those desired results. Then trainers must determine the attitudes, the knowledge, and the skills, level 2, that are necessary to bring about the desired behaviors. And then that final challenge is to present the training program in a way that enables participants not only to learn what they need to know, but also to react favorably to the program, speaking more to their mindsets.
And a lot of times the training people or learning people or talent people, whatever they call themselves, they come up with that stuff on their own. And they say, well, here's what the outcomes should be. Here are the behaviors and the other stuff. Well, the mistake in that is they should be partnering with senior leaders about what are the outcomes they're looking for, and partner with line managers and supervisors. What are the key behaviors? rather than making up their own mind. And it also, Charles, might be there's a CEO that says, well, my outcome of all this training is I want people to feel a sense of community more than anything else. And well, sometimes we may have to challenge someone to say, we could get that community if we all work together. But I think that community then will serve us a higher purpose of profitability or production all those kind of things. So sometimes the customer is not always right because I've had senior leaders say, I just want them trained. I got to have 30 leaders, new leaders trained by 3 months. Say, well, we can do that, but then you got to kind of work with them and partner with them to kind of get them to see that there is more to this than just checking the box. You got to be tactful too with them. You can't try and bully them.
You're right. You have to lead without authority and try to influence without authority as well. And you mentioned, we hear a lot of ROI, right? The return on the investment and training and all sorts of things. I like how you say there's also an ROE, a return on expectations. Once stakeholders' expectations are clear, then learning professionals need to convert those typically either generic or general statements into observable, measurable leading indicators by asking the question of them, what will success look like to you?
That's exactly right. And the ROI, in a classic sense, is always a financial kind of thing. And it's a lot of calculation. I mean, I could fill my office here wall with the calculations that are required to do it. The ROI thing is not credible to me, where people would say, guess what, Gerald? You got a 111% ROI on your training investment. And if you ask to see the data, I mean, well, be ready to be a math major. And I'm not saying it isn't. Some people would say, I want to see that number. Good. Calculate it out. Spend time doing it. But mostly, you want to build evidence to something that is a chain of evidence rather than just a calculation, a math problem at the end. You've got to, in order to look at what attorneys need to do to win a case. And we work with the Department of Justice a lot. They can't just come in the end and say, here's the proof. They have to create a chain of evidence, and that's what we call it, that is credible because they can see how one thing leads to other rather than jumping from people sitting in a training class that accomplished this for your mission. It just isn't very logical to me.
Another foundational principle that really needs to be underscored is value must be created before it can be demonstrated. So you mentioned up to 90% of training resources are spent on the design, development, and delivery of training events that yield about 15% of the on-the-job application, whereas reinforcement that occurs before and after the training event is where the changes really happen.
And that's why we need to redeploy our resources. Instead of spending 90% on 10 or 15% of the power, you need to be shifting people who are instructional designers and stand-up trainers and at least get them doing some other things that are closer to the workplace and the workforce, because that's where the magic happens. And instead of going from level 1 to level 2 to level 4, that's where the power is. And I worked once with an army base, and there was a colonel in there. He was all decked up and stuff. And I could tell right away he did not like me. He was the leader. So I had to think, oh man, this is because if he isn't with me, all the rest of the 20 people in there weren't with me either. So it was break time. I thought, man, I got to do something here. They got 2 more days and I'm laying an egg here. And I heard him talking about his garden during the break and he was bragging about it. So he came back and he said, I'm going to try something a little different here. How many of you are gardeners? And some of them raised their hand. He shot up his arms. I'm a gardener. I said, oh, do you raise flowers? No, certainly not flowers. I raise vegetables, the very best kind. I said, well, let me tell everybody here what the colonel does. In May, he goes to the Home Depot and he buys the seeds and he buys a shovel and a garden hose. He goes back to his house and he puts all these in different rows of radishes and carrots. And then he lovingly covers them up and he waters them. And then he waits the rest of the summer for the harvest. And he stood up and said, Kirkpatrick, you use some colorful language. You don't know anything about gardening. If you think all I have to do is plant those seeds and water them and wait for the harvest, there will be no harvest. I said, why not? He started going through a list of rabbits and squirrels and deer and drought and fungus and all those things. He said, I have to be constantly tending the garden or there will be no harvest. And I said, Colonel, with all due respect, it's the same thing. You've got to constantly tender and watch over your workplace or there will be no harvest. And by that time, we were both standing up eye to eye to each other. And I was waiting. Finally, he said, all right, carry on. He sat down, and the key there is you've got to have some kind of a metaphor where people can see that, like, how about parents go to a training class for new parents? That's all they have to do, and their kid will graduate with honors. That isn't going to guarantee it that they went to a parenting class when he was 2 years old. It is all the other things where you're using the right kind of accountability, right kind of nurturing, right kind of reinforcement, all those things in order to create value. It's silly to think that any training in and of itself will deliver that. It's just not. Now, listen careful. Training is absolutely essential. It's just not sufficient to get the job done by itself.
Many people overemphasize the training event, de-emphasize or minimize the effects of what happens before and after. And that's really where the behavior change is going to happen, if it's going to happen at all.
And Charles, they always say, well, we can't get the line managers to buy in. We can't get buy-in. Well, it's because they're not even trying. They're expecting they're going to send a survey over the wire or test results. That isn't going to get buy-in. They need to go to them and develop relationships with them. That's how they're going to get buy-in with them and see the progress and help them be all involved. And I know it means spending less time in their precious training classes and more time in the workplace, being bilingual and dual citizens with the workplace. That is really where they're going to see their efforts not only creating more value, but recognized, because they're right in the trenches with the workers and the supervisors. They're going to say, thank you. You aren't who we thought you were.
The model also speaks a lot to training evaluation. So let's move into that, because when you get the evaluation part, people send out surveys that are not effective. You identify 3 actions to identify gaps and problem areas. The first action is pretend that the person that took the training is a busy and important person. What kind of verbiage do you want to put in there? Make sure that the instructions are clear. But action 1, pretend you are that busy and important person who'll be taking the survey. Action 2, think of how the items could be interpreted and how the results could be analyzed, and begin with the end in mind. And then finally, create a pilot test just to test to see if your assumptions are correct.
Yeah, that 3 steps, that pretty much does it. And so often when I see surveys, they're asking for the respondent to make a judgment, like the trainer did an excellent job of this, and they're uncomfortable with that. They're going to lie on it. Oh yeah, sure did. They have to be neutral, and also they have to be in the learner's language, because sometimes they're in L&D language or talent management language, and I've looked at them. I don't even know what they really mean. How can just your average person from the workplace come in and know what that sentence is trying to tell them? And then the key to me is blended evaluation. I came up with that term a number of years ago. You need to use a variety of tools and methods to get closer to reality, what's really going on in the classroom and after, and what's happening in the workplace. But relying on a single source like a survey or a test or a 90-day survey, you're just not going to get accurate data. And Charles, you know that people make decisions based on a sentence that someone wrote on the bottom of a smile sheet and changing procedure about that. Just not very wise.
Well, and that's scary. And you also mentioned some good insights with those surveys. Think about those questions. Think about the answer choices. If it's a Likert scale, are they able to differentiate the difference between the answer choices? Or why should you include an NA or a none of the above? Maybe you shouldn't even include that on there. It gives them, the attendees, the participants, an easy way out. So always taking the time to really understand what those questions mean. Are the answer choices fair? Are they subjective or objective? Are people going to think of those distinctions the same way or not?
And the book that I know you've read, and I wrote it, but I read it too, is it's called Kirkpatrick's 4 Levels of Training Evaluation. There is a chapter in there specifically on that, Charles. What you're saying is how to build meaningful and logical surveys that don't cause people to be uncomfortable or give them that sitting on the fence question with the NA or in between. And I didn't write it, by the way. I had someone knows that they're doing the surveys to write it.
But it provides some great insights into it because you have to ask better questions if you want the right answers. And you even list out different categories of questions for each level. Like level one, it's talking about the engagement, the relevance. Did they enjoy the program? So it's more about, does the participant engagement during the program meet expectations? Does relevance of the program to the participant job responsibilities meet expectations? That's surrounding level one. And I think that's a great way to do the surveys, those blended surveys. The survey should speak to all four levels, maybe at different times, because right after the training, it's not appropriate to assess them on level 3 and level 4, but identify specific questions that speak to each level of the Kirkpatrick model, which is going to give you more insights about the training's effectiveness and overall success.
I remember years ago, I had a major consulting firm ask me to review their new hire, the survey. And I looked at it, and I made some corrections. And then I said, okay, at the end, I said, there's way too many questions. I don't think you need these, but there are two questions that I wish you would add. And the first one was, I'm clear about what's expected of me back in the job based on what I learned. And the second one is, I believe this training will help me do my job better. So one was kind of anticipating that this training will help me, and the other was it actually will. And then they tried it for 3 months, and I hadn't heard from them. So I asked them, I said, what did you learn from those two questions? They said, well, we piloted them and we discontinued them. I said, why? Because the instructors didn't like the questions. The scores were too low. You get that? The scores were too low because they were getting paid based on high level the scores were, rather than getting truth from those scores. And I just want, okay, I got nothing on that, because the scores were true, but the scores were true. They're saying, I'm not clear about what I'm supposed to do, and I'm not sure this will help me do my job better. That's the job of the instructor and whoever wrote it, that the answers to those things should be, I am clear, right? You do that with your training. I am clear what I'm supposed to do, and I believe it will help me do my job better. It's right in your mission statement. And I know you guys do that stuff.
Absolutely. And the other thing I see a lot with trainings is what you mentioned as or phrase as the tyranny of the mean, because a lot of trainings don't achieve worthwhile results, or they only do so for a small proportion of the trainees. So on average, training will always be calculated as mediocre. I like how you reframe it to say you shouldn't then be asking on average, how well is the training working? You already know the answer to that, not very well. Instead, ask, when the training works and is used, what good does it do?
Oh, yeah, just like that. Now, wait, Charles. Can't you come up with something a little more sophisticated, a little more scholarly than that? No, the answer is you don't want to. That was perfect.
And then the second reality of training evaluation strongly suggests that most, perhaps 80% or more of the failures of training to achieve the results are not caused by training interventions. They're caused by contextual or performance system factors that were not aligned with the training and or at odds with it. So when we evaluate the training impact, unfortunately, most often we evaluate the training program, when in reality, we should be evaluating the organization's performance management system.
Now, if I had my fingers on the pulse there, I had a thermometer, both would have raised right there when you're talking about that, my temperature and my pulse, because that stuff just grates me. Now, I'm going to just give a tip here, at no charge, of if you really want a level 3, level 4 trifecta evaluation, what you need to do is have a targeted survey that is not 100 questions, but a few questions that go both the supervisors and the graduates. Also, there has to be some level of observation with a clip chart or a flip chart where people are actually observing actual work, which is very reliable. And then finally, you've got to be talking to line managers and supervisors and captains and leaders and interviewing them, formal or informal, to get additional kind of information from them. And you don't want just their opinion. Say you want to dig for some data. So you take that together and you have the data and the information and the feeling from the people you're talking to. You get rubric data from observing and flip charts. And then you also get surveys. And I'll tell you, you get real close to reality, real close to the truth with that in order to make intelligent assessments, and then the right kind of recommendations for change. Not a 90-day smile sheet. That's the worst thing you can do by itself.
I completely agree with you. And many people also confuse the two terms outputs and outcomes. Outputs themselves do not prove worth. Business managers want to know the outcomes. Reporting how many people you trained or how positively they reacted to the program doesn't mean anything unless you have outcome measures. Because outputs only measure activity, what it costs the business. They don't assess the value created. So therefore, right by themselves, they are insufficient to guide future action. What counts are the outcomes.
When you're talking about that, Charles, I remember the first time we talked. You talk about a lot of things with your work and life and stuff, and I remember you said, I want to make a difference. You remember that? And I'm probably not the first person you said that to. And that's what a lot of this is about. It's not just doing your job and take your home, your pay and all that stuff, but it is making a difference, particularly if you are influencing level 3, influencing performance. Guess what? The outcomes, people think level 4 is the hardest. It isn't. Level 3 is the hardest because of human nature. Level 4 is merely making sure that you have the radar to track the progress and make adjustments if you need to. Now, those adjustments aren't always something's not working, but sometimes somebody is getting closer to San Francisco than somebody else. How did you do it? So you want to go and interview them and find out what's happening in this unit, this hospital, this clinic, or this workplace that is superior to the others. And people love that. You've got to also be ferreting out the positive things rather than just the things that aren't going so well. Otherwise, nobody's going to want to talk to you.
You're right. Absolutely. Well, as we end today, Jim, is there one piece of advice you give to training or learning professionals so that they can get a seat at the table and show more business outcomes or impact from their training programs?
There is one, and I can give a lot of credit to Stephen Covey on this because we were working together in Sweden, dealing with some conferences and things, and he told me privately that he really thinks that seek first to understand rather than seek to be understood is the one that we really need to work on, and that means that resist the temptation when someone on the other side of the bridge, the workplace, the workforce, tells you something. Don't say, boy, have I got something for you. I got this training that you're going to love, or this new model, or a new upskilling or something. Resist the temptation and say, really, tell me more about that. They'll say, well, we're having a bit of trouble with some of the thing. Oh, explain what you mean by a bit of trouble. What does that look like? And the more that you talk, the more they will open up, the more they will trust you that you're not going to just throw some solution at them. And eventually, when you do it enough times, they'll say, do you think you can help me? And then the answer is, you know what? If we work together, I think we can improve that situation. Yes. So that's my one thing is don't be using the L language with them, the learning language and the competencies. Speak their language and don't hijack the conversation. Earn their trust.
I love that piece of advice. Thank you so much, Dr. Jim Kirkpatrick, for joining me today. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you and learn more about your work.
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I think it's James Donald Kirkpatrick. I'm the one and only there. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm 71 years old and I'm still trying to make a difference. So if you reach out to me, I'll reach back to you.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.